Welcome to theAnalysis-news. I'm Barry Stevens. In a few seconds, I'm going to be joined by Colonel Larry Wilkerson to talk about the shift in U.S. foreign policy as expressed in last week's national security strategy and the possible military aggression and war crimes it may foretell. Don't forget, on the Analysis website, there's a donate button. And if you like, please subscribe to this channel. Now, retired U.S. Army Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson has been a frequent and insightful guest on this channel. He's had a phenomenal career, most famously, of course, as Colin Powell's Chief of Staff during Powell's tenure as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, and in the 2000s when Powell was Secretary of State. But since then, Larry's been a courageous and powerful critic of U.S. foreign policy. So welcome, Larry.
Good to be with you. I don't know about the courageous, but I'll take the critic.
not many people step out of that role and then are as forthright, perhaps, as you are. On last Thursday, December 4th, 2025, the Trump administration released its national security strategy. It's a pretty dramatic departure from previous U.S. approach, including Trump's. It seems to back off Russia and China being declared major strategic adversaries, and puts a focus on the Western Hemisphere. And I'm just going to read a quick quote. After years of neglect, the United States will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. This Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is a common sense and potent restoration of American power and priorities. Monroe Doctrine, of course, was 200 years ago a policy of the U.S. to oppose the return of European imperial powers in this hemisphere. But as this comes out, a very large naval force has been built up in the Caribbean Sea. There have been insults and threats directed to the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Its airspace has been virtually closed. And most dramatically, the U.S. military has blown up more than 20 small boats and killed more than 87 civilians. Put it all on TV. And we're going to talk about that aspect in a little later with Larry. So, Larry, a president who is elected partly because he hated forever wars, he seems to be getting a taste for combat. Are we looking at regime change in Latin America?
I don't know if we're looking at regime change so much as we're looking at a fond desire for regime change. Marco Rubio may be looking at it, and I think is, from a perspective of kinetic action or military action or whatever, but I think the rest of the administration, and particularly President Trump, is looking at it from the art of the deal perspective. That is to say, he'd like to do what he's doing to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela right now. That is, talk to him on the phone at night and so threaten him during the daytime that Maduro becomes more or less pliant and allows him access to the largest known oil reserves in the world, which of course are in Venezuela. More on that, if you wish, later. But this strategy is something that I have been involved with for a long time, arguably half a century. My specialty in the military was strategic matters, if you will. And my advice to Colin Powell was more often than not strategic rather than tactical or operational. The last such NSS, National Security Strategy, I had a good look at, and even a part in beginning to build from the policy planning staff at the State Department, was George W. Bush's first one, which was delayed and didn't come out until, as I recall, around 2002, about 2 years after he'd taken the helm. That strategy was shocking in many respects, because what that strategy said was, in essence, we are king of the hill. Post-Cold War, we are king of the hill. Anybody that stirs at the bottom of that hill, be he a mouse or a tiger or a lion, we are going to smash him. We're going to eliminate him from the world. And that was the strategy. And, we started out with the global war on terror that morphed into that more complex strategy. And of course, never never realized any full potential, even half its potential, because it was nonsense. It was a aggrandizement of the first order. It was imperialism gone amok. It never had a chance of surviving, least of all, or most of all, really, but we would say least usually in the military, because it costs so damn much. And the fact that we're spending $1 trillion annually now on the defense budget, and really somewhere close to $2.5 trillion, Americans don't realize this, on national security, quote unquote. $2.5 trillion on everything that composes part of that definition. And that includes, of course, the Veterans Administration, Homeland Security, the CIA, 15 other intelligence entities, and so forth. So the fact that it was so physically ridiculous, damn that strategy from the start. This strategy is damned from the start for the same very reason, because we're even broker now than we were then, looking at $1 trillion and soon $2 trillion annual interest payments on our debt, which we will not be able to afford, not for long anyway. But the main reason I dislike it, and your I guess CEO, boss, whatever, Paul J. and I had a conversation about this last night, as he dissected it pretty well, I think. The main reason I say that is that we are just disguising what we were doing before, and disguising it under the sort of rubric of retrenchment in our own hemisphere. But that retrenchment is for ultimately war with China. And it's got a surety to it, even though it doesn't come out and crystal clear say this in the strategy, that even John Mearsheimer has not given it. And John and I have talked about this. War is inevitable with China is the realist position on rising power and declining power. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, but it's not inevitable. And that's always been my argument with John. And I would rather see it not happen, because I think it'll be tragic for the entire world, not just China and the United States. And
well, it's hard to believe such a war would not, or certainly would risk going nuclear. And
absolutely.
if it goes nuclear, it becomes out of control. And if it becomes out of control nuclear, then basically civilization on this planet is ended for now.
Absolutely, except there are people talking about that in a very different mode than they have since 1945. They're talking about as if it could be, and that it could be technologically, that we do a first strike and survive whatever comes back at us and have a better world minus 1 billion or 2 people. That's actually serious conversation within the halls of the nuclear labs and the Pentagon now.
But it does appear that this strategy focuses on this hemisphere. The Russia's making noises that, okay, we kind of like this. You leave us alone in our part of the world, and China obviously wouldn't be very happy about it. But is this perhaps a move away from a more global war on whatever?
Not at all. In my view, it's just a recasting of the cast, if you will. We still have the people that we want in the Pacific. We still count on them, from the Philippines to Japan to Korea. We still are going to be in the South China Sea, now the busiest sea in the world in terms of commerce. I was just looking at that the other day. It's incredible how much tonnage passes across that sea every day.
There was a line in the national security strategy: strong measures must be developed to keep those lanes open, meaning the South China Sea, free of tolls or arbitrary closure. So it isn't entirely giving up on China.
Yeah, not at all. And I think the retrenchment is to, if you will, in simple terms, husband and build resources so we'll be ready for that fight. And as you pointed out, and this is my great problem with this, doesn't matter what you do, China is the #1 economy in the world today. China is outstripping us in every category of national power. I don't see us catching up, particularly not with a $1 trillion defense budget, half of which is payola for either the Congress or defense contractors. No matter what Hegseth does to refine and make pure that process, he's going to fail. We've got a lieutenant in terms of brain power leading the Pentagon. I don't see him making this incredible change that Defense Secretary is far more competent than he have tried to do for the last 25 to 30 years. So we're just going to go deeper into that black hole we're in terms of money and it not being very productive. And it won't matter whether we retreat to our hemisphere or not. And here's another thing that we need to be thinking about. In 2024, Vladimir Putin gave us a bit of our own medicine. He proved the Monroe Doctrine is dead when Admiral Gorshkov, the frigate, came to visit Havana and when the nuclear submarine accompanied it. And now what he's doing with regard to Venezuela in terms of providing support, and it's been substantial, is proving that once again. He's saying to us, you meddled around in my near abroad in Ukraine, see how you like my meddling around in your near abroad down in the Caribbean. And that's what he's doing. So the Monroe Doctrine's dead. So how are you going to revive it, Donald Trump, if in fact Russia, not anywhere near the power China is, but allied, so to speak, with her now, is already negating the Monroe Doctrine?
And China itself, of course, is heavily involved in the South America and Latin America, in that big buyer of Venezuelan oil. There's a port on the Peruvian coast, a major trading party with Brazil. Can they be? Do you think they'll be? What will they do to try to push China out, do you suppose?
Well, last time I checked, China was the leading trading partner for every South American country. So how are you going to push them out when they have that kind of economic power? And I do things like this with some of my military brethren every now and then who take to being insane. Do you know that China has a deep sea fishing fleet that has 6,000 ships in it? No, I didn't misspeak. 6,000 ships, many of which are as big and as much of a displacement as a ship as our Navy ships. This is a 6,000 fleet ship that pours across the world weekly and catches fish and krill and shrimp and everything else everywhere. It's bigger than everyone else's deep water fishing fleets combined.
Yeah,
many of them.
I've seen the from space the pictures of the lights of Chinese ships off the Peruvian coast.
Yeah,
and they vastly outnumber the South American ships.
And many of them are armed. I saw them lined up from Haiphong Harbor out into the South China Sea in a satellite photograph, and it's awesome when you look at them. And this is not to even speak of their Navy. So China's leading in every economic indicator. They're leading in most technological indicators. They have 1 million charging sites for their better electrical cars than our electrical cars. We have 22,000. China's leading so much now that it is actually not able to sell us, even if it wanted to, if it weren't for the tariff battle. If it wanted to sell us the rare earth metals and other things we need for the Pentagon in particular, but other things too, it couldn't, not violate its own economic strength, because right now China's own industries are consuming everything it mines and produces in that regard. So they are so powerful right now. It's just nonsense to think that a strategy of accommodation, which would make some sense, is not far better than a strategy of confrontation, even though it's disguised to a certain extent in this retrenchment.
Well, it's just to look at focus on the immediate crisis in Venezuela. So many of U.S. wars and violence have been about oil. It's kind of a progressive group trope. Oh, it's all about the oil, and one always feels a bit skeptical. Is it really just all about the oil?
It is. It is. Take my word for it. It is. I was skeptical myself. I was skeptical as hell. And Iraq was the place that really fueled my skepticism, because I kept saying over and over again, it's all about, oh, look, listen to Jimmy Carter, what he said in 1978. Vital interest is the Persian Gulf, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that was true, but the real purpose of the 2003 Iraq war was oil, but it wasn't oil for any of our allies or ourselves. It was oil for Israel. If you've read Dennis Fritz's book, or you've read Gary Vogler's book about oil for Israel, you understand that it was for Israel. And that's why Netanyahu weighed in so heavily, and I remember this weigh in on our necessity of doing that war. I couldn't understand why they were so anxious to take out Iraq when Iran was apparently their real strategic focus. But they wanted to take out Iraq, and they went right along with a clean break strategy for that purpose. And I understand now, because the Iraq war, for the Deputy Secretary of Defense in particular, but others as well, was orchestrated to a certain extent from the #3 man in the Pentagon's office, Douglas Feith, who had Mossad agents around him 24/7 for the entire duration of his period in that office. And they were working on him and working on the Deputy Secretary, Paul Wolfowitz, to make sure that one of the results of the Iraq war, and for them the important result, was cheap, discounted oil, and they got it.
But this time in this national security strategy, they have explicitly talked about withdrawing or reducing the importance of the Middle East.
Thank you very much. You just made my point, because I've said all along, this is where I disagree with John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt. They're right in terms of owning Congress and all that with regard to AIPAC and the Israel lobby writ large. But Israel is our attack dog in the Levant. They do our bidding. And when they don't do our bidding, we kind of smack them a little bit. But they do our bidding, and they will do our bidding if they continue to exist. And that's becoming a real question in the Levant as we retrench.
So you think that the what it says in the national security strategy about de-emphasizing the Middle East is simply false?
It's false in terms of we will de-emphasize it as long as Israel is killing everybody we won't kill for us. That includes Arab states if they don't cooperate.
Yeah, and just to return to Venezuela, I mean, how would you think it's going to be a series of bullying? A combination of soft cop, hard cop, that's going to, and do you think it will work? Because, and I asked it, I just to contextualize it a little bit, just to remind everybody that there's been a very long history of the Yankees or the Gringos in Latin America. It goes back way back to the Spanish-American War, but just in living memory, the overthrow of the Guatemalan government and many others, Chile, attacks on Cuba, Dominican Republic, Brazil, etc. It's a painful, in Nicaragua, of course, and it's a painful story. I don't know if the Latin Americans and the Caribbean people of today are going to be quite so easy to convince or overpower, or what do you think about that?
I think Marco Rubio agrees with you, but he's trying tenaciously to get everybody in South America opposed to Lula in Brazil, first point. Second point, he's trying tenaciously to get everybody in South America to agree with the United States and what they want to do to their countries. Ecuador just, of course, repudiated him in a referendum where they voted after the government said they would accept U.S. forces on their soil. The referendum voted against it. So you're right. There is a movement, I think, and it is right to say it's continental, to not repeat these errors they've made in the past by being too close to the Yankees. Here's the problem, I think, with Venezuela. And this 300 billion barrels of oil, the largest known oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi Arabia has remaining, for example. I think Trump is on the phone with Maduro, and I think all this is a bluff in order, and it's working, to get him to allow the multinationals we want, and he wants to, ultimately. Hugo Chavez didn't have too much trouble with this because it helped Venezuela. He wants them back in too, so the deal's going to be that some of these multinationals will get back in, they'll fix up a very, very broken Venezuelan oil system right now. They'll start pumping again. Charles Koch will start refining that heavy sulfur oil again, and everything will be copacetic for both sides, and Trump will claim total victory. I think that's what we're doing. I don't know, but I think
it wasn't Citgo, the Venezuelan company, oil company, I seem to just quite recently paved the way for it to be owned by an American company. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. And
Yeah.
I think the multinationals are very careful. I saw this in Iraq. They would not deal with the northern part of Iraq where there was plenty of oil, the so-called Kurdish district or Sulaymaniyah, Kirkuk, places like that, because they were fearful of litigation later on were something to go wrong because Baghdad and the North didn't agree. The North was stealing oil and sending it to Israel, for example. But the multinationals will be comfortable, at least most of them will, if Maduro and Trump come to an agreement, and it looks like a good agreement. And they would love to get back in there and would do wonders for Venezuela too. So if Maduro's smart, he can work this out, I think, to where he's a winner as well as Trump. And it doesn't matter whether he looks like a winner except to his own people. And he will immediately, because this will alleviate a truly bad economic situation in Venezuela right now, or it will begin to alleviate it. So I think the telephone calls have been productive, and I think Trump's just waiting and Maduro's just waiting to announce it.
That's very interesting. I mean, they talk about it as though it's about drugs and immigration, and those those are the things that really bother them. But I don't know if how widely is that believed in the United States.
It's getting to be less widely believed because people are understanding where the fentanyl comes from, which is the real dangerous drug. They're understanding where the cocaine comes from, and it is not Venezuela. There may be some passage through Venezuela. It's principally Ecuador, and it's not grown there. It's just shipped from there. And people are waking up to the fact that the Navy has been, in many respects, lying about this. And they're also waking up to the fact that the military has never, in this entire so-called drug war, achieved more than 11% reduction on either side of the isthmus in cocaine, for example, reaching the United States, and has driven the price up on the streets, which was their purpose, very little because they have so low interdiction. The fact that what we're doing now is taking out some 80 plus boats or whatever, or people, I guess, and the boats that have been attacked is not even a dent in the drug traffic that really matters. So this is going to become very obvious, as it became obvious that the global war on terror was a farce. You can't make war with a military instrument on a methodology. You simply can't.
You could say you can't really make war on a common noun. You could make war on a proper noun.
Absolutely. And I told Powell in 1989 when I first joined him at Forces Command in Atlanta, Georgia, I said, why are we going into the war on drugs? He said, because the president directed us to. I said, that's a good reason, except we're going to lose. What do you mean? He said. I said, it's not a war you win. First of all, you're fighting a commodity.
Second, you're fighting demand in the United States.
You're fighting a commodity that 60% of America takes down, you know. I mean, let's face it. We're all on drugs of some sort or another, I think, sometimes. But anyway, I then pointed out to him that that is the center of gravity of any war you're going to wage on drugs. It's not the campesinos. It's not the peasants raising the drugs or the labs making the fentanyl now or meth or whatever. It's the people in Europe and the United States taking the damn drugs. That's the target you need to go after. Oh, that's rehabilitation and that's counseling. That's help and so forth. No one wants to do that. Right. Bingo. So why are you dumping the military in this nightmare? That was his answer. The president told us to do it. That's what we're doing now. Trump told us to do it. The sad thing is Trump has told us to become war criminals, and the military is going along with it.
We'll get to that in just a minute. It's really important that we do talk about that. But it's interesting when you do crack down on drug runners and so forth, you do raise the price, as you said, and of course that does increase the profits of the drug barons. I was in Colombia about a year ago. And I remember somebody saying to me, like, well, I said, well, why don't they just legalize it? Why don't they legalize cocaine in Colombia? She said, if anyone who stood up and said that would be dead the next morning, because that'd be the worst thing for the drug business if it were legal. The profits would decline. But yeah, so there's also been in the national security strategy this say that it's a priority to end the war in Ukraine and stabilize the relationship with Russia. It would be a good thing to end the war in Ukraine. But this is a pretty major shift and has frightened the Europeans.
It's not really a shift for Trump. I think he's wanted to do.
That's true.
Yeah, he's wanted to do this all along. He's just been impeded by Zelensky and the Europeans and others, and neocons like Lindsey Graham, who are his own entourage, if you will. But he wants a good relationship for money with Moscow. That meeting that Marco Rubio had in Riyadh with Sergei Lavrov, when he said, you know, you lost $300 billion by your support of Ukraine, he was talking about trade with Russia, got Trump's attention. And it had his attention beforehand, but he wants a better relationship with Moscow, and he is ready to establish it over the head, under the feet, around the bodies of the prostrate Europeans, or at least those who are idiots like Starmer, Merz, and
Macron
in particular. And I think they're going to do everything they possibly can. But we came up with something yesterday. A group of military officers and I were talking about this. We say, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at the United States spending money it doesn't have for weapons it doesn't have to give to the Europeans who don't have any money, to give to the Ukrainians who have no soldiers. That's how stupid this is. And it won't last long. Zelensky is probably, his days are limited. And he'll be gone either with a dollar solution, you know, bang, or some other way. He'll run away in his Bugatti and go to one of his dashes where he's got hundreds of millions of dollars stored. But it'll be over, and no matter how much the Europeans fight it, and therein is a problem too, because if they fall apart before these leaders who are not representative of their people get thrown out, then we could have a real problem, a return to the 30s Europe, if you will, rather than some kind of search for a European security identity, which doesn't include the United States, except maybe for our nuclear umbrella, which is what they should have been looking at all along.
Well, that's a big shift. I mean, if the United States is no longer, I remember the very first head of NATO said the purpose of NATO is to keep the Germans down, the Russians out, and the Americans in.
And
now that's shifted.
That went kaput the moment Helmut Kohl looked at Edward Shevardnadze, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Jim Baker and George H.W. Bush and said, you mean I could reunify Germany and stay in NATO? That went kaput. It's been dead ever since, and presidents like Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and Barack Obama, to an extent, simply didn't realize what was happening. You cannot maintain an alliance like NATO, political or military, with no threat. And there's been no threat. And we tried to multilateralize NATO. We tried to take it to Afghanistan. We tried to take it to Iraq. We wanted out of area operations. Ultimately, we wanted NATO to help us fight China.
Now you have to have somebody to fight. If you've got a military alliance, you need somebody to fight.
Exactly. And it just didn't work. And what we wanted in 1990 and 91, which was a new approach to the entire security architecture in Europe to include Russia in that architecture, went by the wayside when that novice and sexual maniac Bill Clinton became president. It's been going by the wayside ever since.
And that would have, the dream was Gorbachev talking about a common European home.
Yes.
Which
we were
of course,
talking about it too. We were talking about Russia as a observer at both the political and the military aspect of NATO's meetings, and then as a member. People forget that, and they say that George H.W. Bush's promise to Gorbachev not to go 1 inch further east if Germany unified and stayed in NATO was just a promise, just that. It didn't mean anything. That tells you the state of our diplomacy today, if that's true. Word of the president doesn't mean anything.
We often talk about the United States as though, you know, what does it want or what does Trump want? But and you can tell me if this is completely wrong, but it seems to me that the Trump movement contains certain parts that are in conflict with each other. Lindsey Graham, you mentioned, for instance, and this recently Congress, I think, tried to pass some law saying it would limit the ability of the administration to reduce troop numbers in Europe. So there's that block, which is focused on, you know, maintaining global supremacy and the United States in Europe. They're the, you know, tech libertarians who just want to slash government. And there's like Marco Rubio, who wants to presumably have regime change in Cuba. I think he would like that. And so you have these different, and you have isolationists, genuine isolationists, I think, and then people who want to fight China. Is that, are all these elements coordinated, working together, or are they, is this just chaotic?
No, they all clash. Rubio just finished a trip to South America where he tried to talk other leaders in South America than Lula into getting rid of Lula. That's how obscene Rubio is with regard to Latin America. It's not just Cuba he hates. I think he hates them all. What you're looking at is a president, though, that has demonstrated time and time again, Congress be damned. If his golden Congress, his Republican Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene having left him and so forth, doesn't go along with him, Congress be damned. There is nothing in the Constitution, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, that limits that article that defines the powers of the executive, even though it's only about 2 pages as against 6 pages for the Congress, much of which is about what you just said, their power over the armed forces of the United States. It's really significant if you read the Constitution. Trump doesn't give a damn. And the Congress is so pliant, so far anyway, that they don't give a damn either. So if they pass legislation saying, let's say, for example, you can't go below 100,000 troops in Europe, Trump will just go down to 20,000 and tell them to suck eggs. He doesn't care. It's his right as the commander-in-chief to do that. Look at what he's done up to this point in defiance of the Congress. This business,
but he's also,
this business about Venezuela is in defiance of the Congress. I don't see anywhere in there where it says in the part about the executive, and they're saying it's implied, that the executive has the right to start a war. There's nothing in there that says that. We've had plenty of presidents disregard that. Trump just is more flagrant about it.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to come back in and do a part 2 to talk about the possible violations of war that has been happening with the blowing up of the speedboats in the region. So please keep an eye out for part 2 with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. And thanks to you for watching. On the Analysis website, you'll find a donate button. And please don't forget to subscribe if you like this. See you next time.